Hi everyone, welcome to today's session. I'm hosting this one on behalf of Wirehive, and we have our very good guests here, Sagittarius and Ian MacArthur in particular, here with me to have an honest conversation about AI. Welcome, Ian. How you doing?
I'm all right. How are you, Andy? You good?
Really good, really good.
Excellent.
Talking about one of my favourite subjects, of course. Well known myself for talking about artificial intelligence at various different events and things. So I'm quite excited for today's session.
Yeah, I'd imagine we probably come at it from completely different angles. I think you're a real technologist. I'm probably coming at it through the customer lens almost. So it could be very interesting. So
definitely, it's one of these topics as well that data and AI in particular for me is even from the technology angle, I have to think so much more about the customer than I would normally do, or the end customer that's receiving the experience off the back of that. It's such a critical factor to thinking about the technology. Whereas if you're speccing the size of a server for cloud hosting, the end customer experience might vary if you underspec that, but not so much if you get some artificial intelligence wrong or something like that. So yeah, it's something that's always very experience focused from my side of things anyway. So
it's cool.
See. So I've been seeing all the blogs you've been putting out this week, and lots of content all week really on the topic.
Yeah.
There's one thing that really caught my eye early on in the blog about the AI is about you. Really resonates well with me and the same way I approach it. I think it's really nice to kind of demystify AI a little bit as well and have this kind of conversation. But the thing I picked out the most in there is the fact that you hate AI in terms of the terms of the definition of AI, or perhaps maybe just the A in AI. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's a good point. So yeah, I've always kind of talked about it as augmented intelligence, and quite a long time ago, I suppose people just thought that sounded mad, and not long after that, I suppose augmented reality kind of stole the augmented word. So people used to kind of slightly snigger if I said it augmented intelligence, like I hadn't really worked out what AI actually meant. But then over the years, people like, Catriona Campbell over at EY, and even somebody like Dr. Vivian Ming in the Silicon Valley, they've started to use that language, I think, and it's there's a kind of a movement around it in terms of it doesn't alter the technology obviously and how clever it is, but it kind of gets you back to the why and the reason that it was created, and that kind of helps you. It can help you create incredible social change, and it feels as if actually there's momentum behind that, and the big tech firms are now starting to talk about it in that way. So the term for me is really important. And to your point, it's almost like the blog posts are all about the kind of you bit, and I think it is. It's about us. Artificial conjures up the wrong image for me, and it's kind of like artificial in my head means like fake, faux, fugazi, whatever is the right word. But
yeah,
that sort of belittles the amount of work that humans put in, not only from actually developing the technology in the first place, but that whole training piece. If you've ever been involved in AI, that really, really involves a lot of human interactivity to bring what is essentially a newborn baby into the world. So I think it's, the you bit is really, really important. And I think that just flips the conversation slightly. Instead of it being this faceless thing that kind of means trouble, means danger, actually it's just about you and how it's going to help you. And I think just on that kind of like the faceless piece, people are still scared by AI as much as we kind of joke about it. And I probably was the guy 5 years ago that was putting Terminator slides in my decks.
I've done some of those. Yep.
But even now, you've got 40% of people that are still scared by it because they think it's here to kind of replicate and replace. But actually, the reality is the opposite. It's actually boosted jobs enormously. Of course, within that, people have to retrain. But we've learned in the last year that the type of things that can change, market forces get an awful lot scarier than a bit of AI. So so for us, it's very much about you or us or just the human in the mix, I think.
I'm definitely going to adopt it. It's one of those things that I open my AI overview. If I do a workshop or something on AI for businesses, I'll start with, okay, what do we mean by like data and what do we mean by AI? And I break it down and I actually define A as being non-biologically born, being artificial, and intelligence is all about applying knowledge and skills. So it's the data that goes in, it's the training, it's the design. So much on the intelligence side gets covered, and the fact it's artificial is just kind of it's not born. But I think the augmented intelligence, if we're going to rename AI, I'm tempted to adopt that, because there's lots more in the approach that we take with it, that it's about improving either the efficiency or the experience of humans. It's very human centric, the way that we approach the kind of the business case of AI that we're looking at. Obviously there's the sentient AI that is going to destroy the human race in 30 years time, 50 years time, don't know, ask Elon Musk. But definitely the AI that real world businesses are using to compete with their markets they're working in absolutely is about augmenting humans, and humans are still absolutely vital to the mix, I think. So I guess the next question, if it's so great and everyone should be using it, what do you think the key challenges are for brands at the moment, and what's stopping them from using it?
Yeah, I'm sort of I'm in two minds on this. So you've got that kind of, there's this weird thing. So it's like you've got this vast complexity on one side, in the sense of it's just too complicated, it's too much like science fiction. And then on the other hand, as consumers, we're kind of surrounded by it. It's everywhere on a really low level, in the apps and the trading apps, the social apps, all the different stuff that people use. So there's this kind of weird imbalance between it's either really, 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 really complex, or you don't really need to think about it. It will just happen around you. Now, I kind of like that softer side of it. That's quite nice. But somewhere the reality is probably lost in between. So, if you look at stats, it's almost like, I think there's only 7% of businesses left that don't use AI.
Wow, yeah.
But it's like, I think that's a misleading stat. That's my kind of call on it. And I think that's to do with this low level stuff. Absolutely, there are devices and technologies around us that are learning all the time, and we know that. And if that gives you the opportunity to say that you're using AI in a survey somewhere, then probably marketers are pretty smart. They probably say that, and I think that skews the numbers. So I think a lot less people are using it, and then I think that fear is around, they haven't really understood the advantage that it could bring them as a business, and also the kind of perhaps, if assuming it's a commercial organization, the type of revenue that can be generated around it just helping you do your job a little bit better. So it's really interesting. I think, there's a great example of it in monetary terms. So it's almost like if there's a monetary blocker, as in an organization kind of thinks to itself, have I got to invest a lot of money in this? And actually, what is the return? And will we know how to use it anyway? And it's all a bit complicated. But we've got an example within the business that I work in, where there's a client that's kind of employed AI to kind of assess customer struggle, for want of a better phrase, across their enterprise. And the AI found about 80 different friction points. That's not unusual, that seems quite normal. But actually, because of the AI is analyzing really all of the financial data and a whole bunch of other stuff that you plug into it, really those 80 friction points equate to about $92 million of lost revenue. Now, I don't know which business doesn't want to invest in removing that kind of a problem within their business. And bearing in mind, it's not about the money, it's about the fact that those are customer struggles. You've got to get back to the why again. It's about the you, either us, doing our jobs, or the you that's the customer. And if the customer's life is made easier and they enjoy the interaction and there's a longer term relationship that can be had, then that's the real thing. If that then benefits on the financial side for the business, then that's amazing. That's a win-win. So it's not about the money. The money is just a byproduct of customers that engage better, enjoy everything better. And I think AI, that's the reason to embrace it. Your customers just want something slightly better than you're giving them, and AI could give you that lovely little boost.
Yeah, I think that coming back to that point of the 7% of businesses who aren't using AI, I think that we've got 93% of people there that are using AI but not leveraging AI. So I think we talk around maturity. We're doing a maturity assessment as part of the consultancy we do with this, and are you really using your data well, and what are you applying that data to really get the best out of it? And I think we talk around proficiency as well. So if you're just aware of AI, or I think majority of that 93% are probably stumbling across some devices that have got it baked in, or they're using software that you know what, as it's got a feature that maybe they're not leveraging themselves, they've not designed it around their business processes, but they just happen to be using AI because it's conveniently rolled into a SaaS product or something. You know, I think really you got to understand what the business challenges are, where those friction points are, to then say how can we, what data do we have available, how can we apply the latest technology, even if it's not AI. I don't want to derail the conversation today too much, but we get into just automation of processes and things like that with very, very low level AI can make a massive difference to businesses. And I think that's where, if you're thinking about what you're trying to deliver to customers and how you can improve that experience, improve the efficiency internally, things like that, there's using AI and then there's using AI. And I think there's a big difference. And I think, yeah, that maybe that stat is a bit misleading, I think, but certainly lots more every brand can do. And I think if we held our hands up, even Wirehive internally, we could be doing more. I think we're always trying to evaluate new things and work on that. I think you've got to continually evolve and adapt, especially when there's new services every 3 days and things like that coming live on platforms like Azure. It's a crazy rate of change and kind of a white knuckle ride at times, but I think that's only a good thing.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, in terms of, you know, at Sagittarius, it would be exactly the same. It's you know, it's a matter of it's not that I'm preaching about AI, but it's very much, there are any number of systems and processes within the business, of course, where actually, if we had the time to step away from the great client work that we're focused on, we'd love to be able to put some of these innovations in place within the business. And we are doing it all the time, but we aren't kind of at the absolute burning edge of using this across our own enterprise. Absolutely not. There's an interesting point you made on the embedded piece, because, yeah, even in the last, I'd say 2 to 3 years, you're seeing this really nice shift from the big tech platforms kind of almost embedding, not the ones that actually are really at the leading edge of AI, but kind of other vendors are kind of embedded AI into their kind of into their technology. But actually, because of the pace of change that you've talked about, they're very quickly realizing they're almost trying to decouple it and actually realizing, you know, if that's kind of API related and you can then plug to an AI of choice almost, or even a suite of different AIs that are really cutting edge and changing in the same way that the Azure stuff does, then that actually makes your whole stack more intelligent. Because otherwise the clock's ticking on the piece of AI that you released yourself. You know, it's out of date at the moment, you're probably taking it to market compared to the Microsoft and the Microsofts of this world.
Brilliant. So yeah, if you're watching live, please do pop some channels, pop some questions in the channel in the thread below, and the team will pass that on to us so we can ask some real life questions and really put us to the test. But till then, there's plenty more I want to dig into the content you guys have been putting out this week. So to take it more into real world examples, I guess you start to change the blog content rather than overall AI and it's about you and the kind of empathy side and human side into maybe examples with e-commerce and making people put things in their baskets and how it can really be applied to one of the more obvious cases in terms of retail. Yeah, some stats on there are great. 79% of consumers will only engage with a brand if that offer has been personalized. And I'm a typical consumer that's all about the experience. I'm really emotional in terms of when I purchase things, even the smallest, most ridiculous thing. It's an emotional purchase, and lots of work's gone into that decision, and it's far more experience related than anything else. So, I mean, do you want to talk around the idea of that and how it can impact some real world scenarios?
Yeah, the personalization thing it's almost a bit of a trigger for me in the sense of you got that kind of spooky personalization. There is actually a term for it, but I've forgotten what it is. Where people really feel as if they're being followed around, and you still get your average person is like, was Facebook just listening to me? Why is it sending me this? Well, you know, all of that stuff. But we've almost, I think, digital, or the latest kind of decade of digital, has really opened our eyes up to personalization. However, it's always been there, in the sense of there are probably kind of media planners or, you know, people that have worked in radio or TV or magazine publishing that are kind of slightly laughing to themselves about a new conversation about personalization, because of course that's why a published magazine in print has particular adverts in it, because there's a profiling of who buys that magazine. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when you drop those ads in, those people are more likely to interact with those. So the concept of personalization is as old as the hills. It's just that with cookies or not cookies, all of that stuff just kind of enhances that and makes it right. So you'll often hear people talk about personalization that gets it wrong, and that's incredibly irritating. But to your point on the stat that I put in the blog, the expectation is there, no question. It's almost like we really, really, really don't like it when it's wrong, but we absolutely expect it to be there. So it's a really interesting tension, and actually it's almost a flashpoint for brands, because they've got to get that right. That's a really, really a razor's edge in terms of tolerance, in terms of personification, which I've always been a believer in terms of that kind of slightly anonymous way of starting to group and cluster somebody based on their behaviors, or the kind of the fingerprints that they leave on things around the internet, or the signals that they give you. But once you get into hardcore personalization, you've got to be understanding those behaviors and those need states, and understand what is just contextual, as in I don't know what would be a version of that. There's a different human behavior between somebody that sits at their kind of Sainsbury's, Ocado's, Tesco's account to really think about a big shop on a desktop, and somebody that's flying down the road, walking to catch a train that they're late for, suddenly fires up at their app and remembers that they didn't order any hummus or cucumbers or whatever it is. And that's a completely different need state. And if personalization assumes that to be the same thing, it can do some really, really strange stuff. So I think brands really, really need to get that right. I think, certainly for me, it's quite obvious, but somebody like Amazon does it well, but not in the way that you would expect. It's almost like when it knows I'm on my mobile, it's much more likely to think that I'm probably tracking a package, I'm probably going to reorder something. So it's a completely different need state to the one that browses, to the one that's looking at what other people bought, all of those different types of recommendation engines. So very, very different. So contextual is probably the right way to see personalization, and take it out of the mindset of knowing the explicit data. It doesn't really matter if I know that Mrs. Jones, that's her name and she's in a particular part of the world. That's great for building out a rich data set. But that isn't where the personalization lies. The personalization lies around what that person actually needs now. And the more helpful you are, and the more useful you are as a brand, and the quicker that all happens, you'll see them again and again and again and again. And if they come to you with different need states, then that gives you a whole different set of data to analyze and understand, because that could be connected with some other trigger that which is around time of day or day of week or that type of stuff.
I think Amazon improved as well. I remember giving them a hard time a few years ago, because if you buy a TV on Amazon, guess what? For the next 2 weeks, you're going to get recommended TVs, as if you're now setting up your own version of Currys or something, that you're just reselling TVs now. Nowadays, you get a recommendation, which is maybe an add-on or an associated item, or what people normally follow in a pattern, having bought that big ticket item. And it always says, because you viewed or because you purchased, at the top of the category, which I think is a really nice touch to give that kind of transparency of, we're recommending these things because of this reason. And it just opens that takes that can of worms away. You don't feel abused or violated in terms of they're digging into your data too much. And it's a really nice way to present that well. I think they've done a lot of improvements there.
And I think that's because their DNA is, we can barely remember, but their DNA was books. So therefore, if you bought a book, really, they were trying to categorize you by the fact that you were definitely going to buy more books. So that was no problem. And then it was just into subject matter or fiction type, or just some tiny little things where they kind of sort you into various piles. As you say, you buy a 50-inch widescreen TV, that's a completely different thing.
Yeah.
Some of that kind of almost legacy way of thinking about product recommendations probably still exists within their business, but I'm experiencing less and less across. I see pointless stuff not very often, so I don't know if I'm a good use case for interacting online. I don't know, but
you're becoming easier to read, or the technology is catching up with you.
Sure.
Either way.
Yeah, I think it's easier to read, but I think that's that kind of yin-yang augmented relationship where I almost know what inputs to put in for it to give me better results. So we're helping each other. That's a symbiotic thing. And we joke around user errors and things like that. But I just think people that are getting better at their expectation of technology and how it can help them whiz through experiences far easier than those that don't. And that's really, it's not that, for instance, some older generations significantly older generations that may still struggle with handsets or devices. Tablets have been a godsend for them, but it's that their expectation of the technology is different. That's what causes that jar. It's not that they don't know where the buttons are or how to follow things intuitively. It's not as simple as that. It's the fact that they don't really know what they're being asked. So there's not that give and take. And I think we'll just evolve. Sounds a bit grand, but I think we'll evolve as a race almost to engage with
I think we've got a question in the chat from Annabelle. Hi, Annabelle. She has asked us, to what extent do you think AI can be used as a force for good? It's a big question, isn't it? Quite deep.
It's a great question. So I worked on something a while ago now. So on a personal level, that's a really great question. That means a lot. That sort of, that kind of touches my soul a little bit. So on a personal level, I did some work. I've worked with AI in loads of different ways, and I did some work with a large cancer charity many years ago now, where we kind of took, the simple version of it is that we took the technology that scans weather patterns, historic and into the future and live, and really understands where things start. So its ability to predict a storm is phenomenal, for instance. And then if you then feed it hundreds, thousands of very early tumor scans, the very way that it thinks about how storms come from almost nothing and coincide is exactly the way that cells develop and cancer grows, basically. Now, if you're also telling it what malignant look like within that kind of context, its ability to predict things that are going to turn into trouble that you can deal with early is phenomenal. So where AI can learn and help save lives, basically, is totally inspiring to me. And there's stuff around, early warning stuff that people like British Red Cross are engaging with in terms of understanding where floods are going to happen in advance so they can be first responders. There's the kind of lower level stuff where AI is helping individuals with, speech problems and hearing problems and sight challenges and things like that. So, like I say, it's all about us. And my take on the human race is that the human race wants to do good, a lot more good than it wants to do harm. So therefore, if AI is augmenting us, then perhaps, I'm not saying the balance, people that want to do harm are also being helped by AI. There's probably 10 documentaries on Netflix about that. But we have an opportunity to solve some of the world's biggest societal problems, and AI can help us get there. Just because that the data around, how do you really, if the biggest killer is, malaria, how do you really tackle that and all of that data and all of those challenges? Well, you can now, because AI is going to help you sift through all that and help you as a human make some really great decisions that benefit everybody. I don't know if that answers the question, but
I think it does. I think I can add a bit as well. I feel very privileged to be in a position where I get to talk about AI and run workshops interactively with people, open their eyes to what's possible, and then hear their ideas. And we've not had anyone come to the workshop with an idea that puts the human race at risk or it does anything bad. So that's good. So we're inviting the right people for a start. And some of the things I think I don't know if I can beat early sort of recognition of tumor growth or cancer things like that, but there was one project that I got to help with a little bit and to speak about, which was a team tracking a pod of dolphins in the North Sea, and they were using similar tech to what Microsoft's using as part of their AI for Earth, where you can just from photos, either professional photos or people out on the coast taking a picture on an iPhone, you can sort of recognize particular individual animals based on the shape of their fins and things like that, which is fascinating. You can even do that. And by tracking this pod in this new way of these dolphins, they're able to infer much more information about the health of the marine ecosystem in that area, and then the wider world, really, from understanding how that's happening. So sometimes the real simple bit of image recognition that's been developed for a really vague application can be turned into something that's really amazing and can really help with the environment and the climate for everyone on Earth. I think another great example is premonition as well. Have you seen Microsoft Premonition?
Yeah.
So a good few years ago, if you Google premonition as homework, anyone watching this, you'll find 3 years ago there's a picture of a person with a net trying to catch a mosquito, and then they did some sampling and they did some kind of very complex artificial intelligence and analytics on the DNA and everything that was contained within the samples. Nowadays, in the last year or so, Microsoft Premonition has evolved into a much bigger beast. So they've worked and engineered these automatic devices. They look a bit like a Sonos speaker kind of thing, and it can identify pathogens or mosquitoes flying past. It will, at the time, decide if it wants to take a sample. It'll capture that mosquito without harming it, take the sample, it will release it back into the wild, and I think it can take samples from somewhere between 10,000 or 15,000 mosquitoes per 24-hour period, and then that goes up to the cloud. They've got something like 3 trillion different genomic sequences that they can then reference that to and identify all kinds of different biology in that sample. So they can say that mosquito in the last kind of 2 weeks or whatever has bitten a cow. That cow had a particular disease, which now we need to worry about that being an outbreak of the kind of an epidemic or something that might be happening in that part of the world. You place one of these devices around kind of different areas and different ecosystems around the globe, and all of a sudden you're stopping Zika from having such a big impact on people's lives. You potentially, if you put it in a Chinese wet market, maybe you catch coronavirus early next time. It can make a huge difference to people's lives, and the fact that we can do that through a combination of the artificial intelligence, which has been there for a while, the kind of underlying algorithms. We've known how to do these things. We've had the data on the genomic sequencing and things for a long time as well. It's just a bit of engineering, a bit of new way of applying that technology, and the dramatic increase in power we have to compute these things now means that things that just were science fiction 5-10 years ago are things that are making the world a better place around us. So
yeah, and if you think about the exact technology that you've described, and then layer over it over almost the pod example, the dolphin pod example that you said before that, very quickly you end up in a place where the ability to map the species that are falling into extinction, for instance. Now, of course, we've always done that. And my daughter's always said to me, "How do people know when an animal is actually extinct?" And I kind of very casually kind of say, "Well, it means it hasn't been seen for a while, basically." And I kind of went into various sample sightings, the whole kind of the science of it. But actually, if you've got devices around in the same way, and I'm not suggesting that we should be capturing things, but if technology has the ability to almost tag, for want of a better phrase, some rare beetle, then actually, if the net result is that we have a better chance of saving entire species because we actually know when they're down to incredibly limited numbers in particular parts of the world, which of course science thinks it knows before AI, but actually we could get really, 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 really serious about that. Again, that's a really great thing. So there's these stories all over the place where just the ability to kind of do what humans have always wanted to do, but kind of amplify us and turbocharge us and enable us to do it in a million places at once is just incredible. Incredible.
Definitely, completely agree. So this might actually, you might have already answered this, but I guess which use of AI is the most fascinating to you? Is it that AI for good kind of element, or is there any other examples of where AI gets really interesting?
Yeah, it is all the good stuff. There's no question about that. But from a superficial, that's probably what I spend my time reading about when I'm not at work, I guess. But it's almost like when it comes back to my job and the kind of what that's really about, which is that whole experience piece. The bit that really fascinates me most in terms of its application of getting people the things that they need quicker, better, faster, all of that stuff. So that's where my kind of personal interest lies. So I'm particularly interested in where AI is embedded or connected to kind of customer data platforms and CRO tools. that's my bag, I suppose. That's the space that I work in. So just joining together that behavioral data and that purchasing data, and then layering over that, stuff that we've known about for years, sentiment analysis, understanding moods, all of that stuff, in something like, into a product like BoxEver, for instance. And then because BoxEver has that API type way of working that I talked about earlier, it doesn't matter if you plug that into IBM Watson or Azure Cognitive Services or Keras Python libraries, or it doesn't matter. It will just start to learn and optimize the experience for every customer. And we're just all customers all the time. It's almost like it's a part of who we are as humans that we forget about. But we're interacting with brands all the time and buying the things that we need all the time, all the way from the banking we do to the car insurance to the shop it's just never ending. We probably spend something like, I don't know, a quarter to a third as much time doing that, being customers, as we do asleep in bed, and we've always been told that mattresses are really, really important. So I think probably this stuff is also quite important.
Nice. We've got another question in the chat from Aaron. Hi, Aaron. How do you value RPA versus AI from a user perspective?
I'll let you go first on that.
Yes, I mean, RPA, so robotic process automation, is, for me, it's always been a difficult subject. I mean, when we talk about AI, there's the sentient AI and there's the narrow AI, and we can draw a line, say, anyone that's come to this workshop looking to build a Terminator, kind of see me after class, or there's the exit, and we're talking about business AI. But RPA, in whatever the flavor, is much more closely kind of considered as this could replace human jobs and this could be making people redundant and things like that. So it's harder to kind of pitch that as augmenting, I suppose, than AI potentially is. But in various sort of implementation, I guess it depends on the company that's putting it in and why they're using it. But I guess we like to work with forward-thinking brands. We would look at tools like the Power Platform that Microsoft put out there is great. So Power Automate, or Flow as it was called before, is a great way of automating workflows and simplifying things. And there's a lot you can do with technology like that, which is technically RPA, which allows you to cut out the mundane work that humans are doing and allow them to be more valuable to a business. And I think you touched on it earlier. It's about the kind of the retraining, reskilling of humans as well for these types of tools. So there's definitely value in both. I think inherently RPA, you're going to automate a lot of admin and mundane work that's going to potentially overnight transform how much value that person that was doing those tasks can give to a business. AI might be a longer return on investment, but certainly more potential in the broader scope of AI of what a business can do, can completely transform the service it delivers and the experience that customers are getting. Or for examples like the Seeing AI app that's out there for the visually impaired, the experience they're having in life of being able to technically see what's around them by audio feedback of computer vision telling them and describing their environment around them. That's amazing, and you can't compare any RPA tools with that level of augmented ability. But it's certainly valuable from a business perspective, and I think it's definitely important to be aware of these things. Just like if you use Microsoft Word these days rather than handwriting all your documents, which I'm sure every business out there is doing now, there's RPA tools that are going to be commonplace in the next 5 years, 10 years, that there's going to be as broadly used as Microsoft Office and things like that.
Yeah, for me, I think where something like RPA, and there are other areas as well. For me, AI is about learning. I think I try and stay away from, it's almost like the 25 different definitions that sit within AI or around AI, and understanding the difference between automation and machine learning and all of those things. That's all cool to me, but in my head, it's about the learning thing. So of course, there's a stage of RPA stuff where, and you almost don't know how far Boston Dynamics have taken some of this stuff. You only get to see it on YouTube these days. But where RPA is actually learning, I think, is fascinating. And it's almost like, when do we call that AI and when do we not? Is AI an ingredient in a serious piece of RPA. So the two kind of mix a little bit. But to your point, Andy, it's reframing that. I'm old enough to remember the world being up in arms because email was going to kill postal services, right? That's how old I am. And it's like these aren't things. The world moves on and it changes. And if actually, no, I could totally recognise that if you're somebody that, for instance, works in warehousing, and there's a serious part of your job that might be around, lifting, moving stock, all of those tasks that go on within a warehouse that are pretty difficult, right? If a piece of RPA comes in and actually is going to move the heavier stuff, or is going to, do that, then actually it's just freeing you up to do something better. It's much more, my view is, and there was something that I looked at when I was here at South by Southwest a couple of years ago. They had loads of exoskeletons there on display that you could kind of put on and play with. And actually, I still think that's augmented, that is augmented. So it may well be that warehousing job is exactly the same, but it may well be that you aren't going to have a spinal operation after 10 years of doing it, because actually you wear some kind of RPA exoskeleton that totally transforms the amount of weight that you lift, consistency, or instead of you having to understand the knowledge of a giant warehouse system and understand where stock is, actually part of that exoskeleton is also steering you towards stuff. There's just a million different applications of all of it. And I just think we have to put the fear part aside. Things just move, things change. I just think that's normal. That's the same for all of us. The same for all of us. Even if you're a specialist in something like, I don't know, search marketing, somebody like Google or even Microsoft with Bing, they're changing the game all the time. What you thought you just learned a couple of years ago is about to change, and is about to change, and is about to change. And you move with it and you change. And when you look back, you can't believe that you used to do those things. You can't believe that you used to have manual media plans. You can't believe that you used to manually bid on the price of advertising. There weren't these kind of exchanges, automation things, but everybody's still doing their job.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's not something that I fear on any level. I believe in the human race to such a degree that it just doesn't concern me.
Nice. We've got another question. This one from Adam. Hi, Adam. So what blockers do you both come up against from technology and experience optimization angles that stops brands fully embracing AI? And how could they work harder to overcome them? So,
yeah, I think it's back to a point that I made earlier. I think lack of understanding, or certainly those that talk about it, and that could be me or you, Andy. Hopefully it's not us, but we're not simplifying it enough or making it relevant enough. You can get very caught up in the bubble of some of these advanced subject matters and just go down the route of talking incredibly technically about them. Obviously, that was the point of the posts this week, where I'm just trying to talk in some really basic terms about how useful this stuff is in a way that might resonate with marketers that are just very, very busy. They don't need to hear all of the jargon around this stuff. So certainly understanding is a key factor. Then understanding the benefits and how quickly a proof of concept or a trial or some kind of innovation experiment could be around, well, what if we just trained that to do that? And we just looked, so for instance, we're doing a proof of concept work at the moment for a very well-known bathroom brand. And actually one of their biggest challenges is that they kind of, when people have installed these, luxury taps and shower units and this type of thing, when they break, finding parts for them is incredibly difficult, or even identifying parts, as it were. So there's a whole bit of customer struggle around that, which might be just around, a washer or a grommet or something to do with bathrooms that's important. But actually, if you get AI to kind of scan all of that stock, understand what they all are, then very quickly the device that's in your hand, your phone, you can easily point that at, at some plumbing essentially, and understand which bits are missing, go straight to those, order those. And that's if you're a professional. There's a version of that some of the big car brands obviously use when it comes to mechanics and engineering. And again, that's really useful application. So it's trying to find something that sparks a brand's imagination. and then a proof of concept, I think, and then just getting them to just switch it on and see if it delivers for their business. Certainly from a CRO point of view, very quickly you present a hypothesis to the client, broadly speaking, based on their experience of their customer, they may agree, and then just put it into practice, deploy some tools and just see what happens. Help them understand the risks around the size of tests, the length of tests, all of that type of thing. Obviously you could do that manually. That way of working existed long before AI, but I think AI enables you to not take more risks, but it enables that whole mechanism to learn as it goes along and therefore minimize risks, which I think is an even greater opportunity to buy it. I think in one of my blog posts, I talk about the fact that, when you use AI within CRO tools, it's like betting on a horse race where all of your money is just going on whoever's in the lead at any given point. So you never, ever lose. And that's the sort of comfort that brands need in order to kind of experiment on this stuff, because what if it goes wrong? Part of that fear comes back, that 40% of people that are scared of AI, that creeps into people's minds because they think they've switched something to autopilot and it's going to do it wrong, basically.
Yeah, I agree. Why wouldn't I? I think from a technology standpoint, the blockers are sometimes around the data, but those are things that every company needs to be sort of capitalizing on and improving their data estate, making that more democratized across the business, making it more accessible. That in turn, once people start realizing the value in the data that they're generating in different roles in the business, will help the data quality improve over time and give people a real interest in making sure that that's well maintained, which gives you much better scope to do things with AI on top of that data set. I think the biggest blocker, and I think it's maybe a combination of the two elements, I think, is just people not being aware of these things, too caught up in the day-to-day. They've got business challenges, they've got goals and objectives they're trying to meet, and I don't think many people are really aware of how much AI can make a massive part of going and smashing those goals for the next 3 years on what their business needs to achieve. I think you've got to take the time out of the business really to evaluate and understand, and then it's potentially a cultural change for a business to start to really adopt technology as a driver for how you're running a business and improving an ever-growing rate.
Yeah, I think there was it's a few years ago now, and actually I think, Andy, it might have been you that showed me it. So one of the challenges that we face, for instance, on that proof of concept that I talked about, is that the data input is images, because the AI wants to see something in order to make a choice. Is it that or that? So actually the amount of images that you have to feed into it is actually a challenge in terms of sourcing those, making sure they're right as part of its training. But I think you showed me something a couple of years ago where the moment that became the challenge, then actually you could then train the AI to start to generate those images itself as part of the training mechanism. So starting to go and find images and combining them in order to give an example of what you're definitely not looking for and what you are looking for. So then that reference library for learning can turn into hundreds of thousands of images really, really, really quickly, because the AI is also doing that bit. And I love that, I love it when it sort of turns on itself in some kind of weird inception thing. And actually you've taken away all of that worry, all of that human effort. So I love stuff like that. But as you say, people are very, very, very busy. In their mind, they've got better things to be doing than thinking about this stuff. But this is the stuff that will give them the time back to be thinking about the better things. So that needs to become some kind of self-fulfilling prophecy at some point.
I think that's it. I think anyone that's not customer-centric, thinking about experience-driven, particularly in products and services organizations, if you're not customer-centric, you're potentially the blockbuster sitting there waiting to get left behind. I think Blockbuster's a great example, right? A terrible example for them, but of how a startup or an enterprise that's already in the market can adopt this kind of approach, can leverage vast amounts of data that they have on customers and go and take that and accelerate past the competition in fantastic ways for them. Obviously not so great for the Blockbusters of the world, but I think there's so many different industries where we're seeing that now. There's the obvious examples. I think everyone's seen and heard those, but yeah, I think there's ultimately competition there that's really going to become very difficult to keep ahead of if you're not doing this already yourselves. I think we've been saying that for a few years now. So if you're still not using AI, yeah, see us after class. I guess get in touch, because you just need to have that conversation internally and decide why you're not using it, and have a good discussion there. And we've got another question from Simon. Hi, Simon. As a C-suite, what boardroom level problems is investment in an AI strategy going to address?
That's a great question. So I think the biggest challenge for businesses, I'm going to say, is data. I think modern businesses, and even for a small business, there's lots of data that's getting generated. If you're a huge business, then that it really is the definition of big data, of course. And I genuinely think that the key to business success probably lies within that data. So the prize is enormous. And I think that's where kind of AI has its best use at a C-suite level. If you think about all of the data that you consume at board, that might be around finances, or it might be around customer satisfaction, or it depends what type of business you are. Product sales, product development, all of that stuff. Getting AI to really help you gather all of those insights from all of the data that you've got and be able to compare them, mash them together, find, causation, as it were, or, that's really the sweet spot for AI. I think if you're C-suite, it's also a simple way of proving its value. It's proof of concept work, but it's a simple way of proving its value to the rest of a board. If you've gone away and found something that actually the organization has probably had at its fingertips for many years, but nobody has actually analyzed that. That's a kind of like a real light bulb moment for a group of people. And then if you're getting in, whatever that is, the classification of that data, categorization, all of that stuff, and then how it's kind of smashed together. So even where the AI helps present that data back to you in a cohesive manner around various kind of BI tools that can learn and adapt, that's a game changer, I think, for C-suite, especially because it finds a common ground. You often get at a board level different specialisms that run different parts of a business, and therefore there's not a lack of interest, but they don't really understand it. You've each got a responsibility. Whereas I think AI can help turn that into a common language. It helps turn really complex data into something that's really tangible for people that wouldn't normally engage with it. And again, that empowers us, kind of the C-suite, to make faster decisions, really understand, have its finger on the pulse. For a long time, we've talked about dashboards for many years, and it's the immediacy of a dashboard that I really care about. I've always been, seen dashboards with hundreds of stats on, right? And it's almost like a dashboard is called a dashboard for a single reason. I'll say this over and over and over again. It's supposed to mimic a car. I can tell the oil temperature in real time. I can tell the speed in real time. I can tell the revs in real time. And that's because it's mechanical. But businesses aren't mechanical. But AI gives you that opportunity to actually see the live data of a live business that's alive. It's actual pulse, for want of a better phrase. And I think that's something that C-suite should enjoy, bring to life, can then communicate down through a business in order to help people understand what actually the objectives of the organization are. Everything about that is good news. Does that answer the question, Jim?
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm gonna start my response with a caveat. When we talk about AI strategy or even data strategy, which you need data to get to AI, right? I think if we talk about that for different businesses, sometimes that's going to be a documented approach of the tools that we use to get the best out of our data and the knowledge we have about how we're running the business. It could also, for a more enterprise business, be a team of people that are the business intelligence analysts and the experts that are providing that data with a much better insight. But whether it's a documented process or a whole team of people, if you don't have an AI strategy which is anywhere between that scale, I think you can't really say that you're that serious about really improving what you're doing as a business. And obviously you're meeting in boardrooms on a regular basis, arguably to just do that. So without an AI strategy or a data strategy there to really help guide how you're doing that, how that the report you're looking at even if you've got all of the KPIs in your dashboard, how do you know they're even telling you the right thing? Are they accurate? Are they coming from sources that are sort of validated and trusted as an organization? You need to have a strategy to make sure that you're doing those in a way that you can really use that to fuel the way that the business is driven. So we've got another follow-up question with Simon as well. So what do you need to change in your organization to set you on a good footing for the AI strategy? What could hold you back? For example, you're a farmer. What new prerequisite practices should you be looking at for a farmer that's looking to leverage AI as part of the business?
Is that a farmer with an F or a farmer with a PH?
That is a farmer with an F.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting.
I've got a good example for a farmer, but maybe
yeah, well, go for it.
So understanding what is out there that you could potentially use, and sort of the blue sky thinking is a great place to start for me. I think you can't be seriously embarking on documenting an AI strategy without seeing that real world use case of, oh, if only we could do that kind of thing. So I think it starts with the big dream, and then you rein it in, and you start to tackle the hurdles to get you there. So a great example for farming, there's various use cases of people either through soil sensors in the ground, or even drones taking surveillance, or step above that, satellite imagery over time, understanding the I guess the health of an environment across a farmer's land, to understand what field is the best place to grow the crops this year, and forecasting which one based on weather patterns and things, and other forecast data, as much data as you can get your hands on, to understand how to make those big decisions early in the year, obviously, when it can really affect, sort of make or break business for someone in that kind of industry. Understanding that, and that there's so many use cases that are doing exactly that, and not just for farming, but environmentally across the planet, understanding climate change and how these things are impacting those things. So starting with looking into in sort of great examples of what is being done out there, and it's not science fiction, and then reining that back in. So in terms of setting you on a good footing, it's looking at getting those data sources. What ones are publicly available data sets? Which ones can we get ourselves from investing in some sensors or something for real-time health of the soil and things like that? And then and using that as part of the business decision process. Any business, I think, is, you could take that, probably that kind of 3-stage process. What do you think, Ian?
Yeah, it's my response would be the same. I'd probably come at it from just almost the what back to the why again. So I think, if I was a farmer, which I'm clearly not, but I actually do live on a farm, so I'm looking out the window at some crops. But certainly really sitting down and thinking about the business struggles, and I say business, but actually a lot of that is real practical stuff if you're a farmer, and you may, that doesn't mean if we're talking about fields, it could be livestock, it could be all kinds of stuff. But understanding where the maximum effort for minimum return almost exists within farming. Now, some of that, there's a version of AI, and I could probably write a lot about this because it's quite an exciting subject, but there's a whole chunk of stuff which is the equivalent of almost the industrial revolution around farming, in terms of the difference that it could make. Now, if some of that gets incredibly granular, some of the stuff that you've touched on, all the way from, if the end result, for instance, is, batching up and selling a crop, for instance, the timing around that, the quantities, the soil, the quality of the yield, the timings that you actually go out onto the land, you could walk all the way back from that and find incremental things that AI would almost inform you on, and they might seem really small, but the collection of that could be 10% greater yield, or 25% greater revenue, or there's a percentage attached with all of that assistance that the AI is kind of augmenting your operation with. And when margins are so tight in farming, which they have been for a very long time, I think that's an incredible place to start. But I think you've got to start with, what are the actual business challenges? What are the things that I need to change? What's the most difficult thing about what I'm doing? What's the thing, whether or not it's market forces on prices, whether or not you're being forced down a particular road on dairy products. There's a whole bunch of challenges in farming. But AI could help you navigate some of that by having historic data around, even if you could feed it with market data around that particular crop, weather data, as you've said, financial data, customer data in terms of the trends, because sometimes you're in farming and you farm a selection of products, but actually because consumer demand ebbs and flows, sometimes you're having to change what you farm. You see less rape fields than I've seen for much now. So it's like, I don't know much about that market, but something's changed. So I think that's a really interesting space to start to embrace and read about AI and understand how it can align to really practical businesses like farming.
Totally agree. We'll come back to that point on. I guess there was a something I read in the AI to increase customers blog that you put out about the kind of holy grail and only becoming useful if you're concentrating on the value and you're doing the right things. But there's one more question for Simon. Conscious of time, so I think we'll make this the last question. So what strategic roles should boards be looking to hire to make sure they have the mindsets in-house to capitalize on AI?
I think it's about the type of technologists that you hire in the first instance. I'm lucky that I work in a business full of brain boxes, and you're one of these type of people as well, Andy, in the sense of you're fascinated. You got an encyclopedic might be. I don't know if I'm setting you up for a fall there, but you've got an incredibly broad knowledge of the subject anyway. But you're a kind of eyes open, lean forward technologist that is interested in all of these things and the application of them. And there's probably people listening to this now that kind of would say, we're all like, aren't we all like that? No, we're not. There's loads of technologies that are super niche and will help organizations build incredible infrastructures and architectures and all kinds of things, but they aren't necessarily interested in this. So the technological hires that you hire that are around, it's that kind of mix of futurist meets business analyst meets creative technologist. There's a bit of a kind of a hybrid here. It might be a bit of a unicorn I'm describing, but that type of a leader, somebody that's interested in going and looking for new and innovative solutions to age-old problems. That's what you need to hire. And that may not be that may not be the chief engineer or the CTO or the head of IT that you're currently talking to. So you need to kind of reframe that and look a little bit deeper, perhaps in the same way, and this was from Simon, but perhaps framing the question to a technologist in the same way that you have. Keep it practical. Don't kind of bring the conversation to the technologist so that they can talk about their world. Keep it in your world, because a technologist would love to talk about applying their knowledge to real practical, real world changes that humans have. So I think bring them towards you instead of going towards them. It's not that you've got to learn about the technology and then go find somebody that understands it. Talk to somebody that wants to understand your world, and then they'll bring something of more value, I think.
That really resonates with me. I think far too often when we talk about AI, there's all these cool things, and then it's almost like we have the hammer and we're looking for the nail to go and apply it. Like that's great. I need a chatbot. Like, why do you need a chatbot? Let's take this back. What are the business challenges? Well, the sales team aren't closing enough deals. Is a chatbot going to help with that? Probably not. So let's look at, okay, how can we do forecasting? How can we understand customers better? There's loads more things you could be looking at specifically to the friction and the challenges. In terms of the question from Simon on the hires, I think Simon has alluded to knowing the answer to this when he talks about mindset. So hiring people with the right mindset is far more important than hiring someone with a specific title. But I do think you need to have someone that with ultimate ownership and accountability of the innovation. So whether that's a chief data officer or a chief innovation officer or someone at board level, you don't even have to hire someone, but someone that's going to say, right, we're going to take this on, we're going to do this, and we're going to dedicate time and resource, or working with a partner to facilitate this. Absolutely, like working with yourselves who are already so ingrained with the businesses you work with in delivering that amazing experience. You're best placed then to really understand that interaction between a brand and its customers to say where these types of things can be done. So definitely resonate with that and completely agree. I think I'm going to come back to this holy grail. So there was a bit on there that for me was just if we were going to take maybe 2 sentences out of all of the content you've put out, for me this is the most important one. So, and it's the one I always stress. So I think it's a good thing to recap on. Data only becomes an insight if it's insightful. and insight only becomes valuable if it's actionable. I love that. And I think, yeah, if there's so much money you can spend on AI, and you can do some really cool things. And if you're the farmer, don't start with putting up the drones and buying the soil sensors tomorrow, because you need to understand where the value is. Where are you burning money from harvesting at the wrong time, or are you using the wrong fields? You need to understand what the challenge originally is before you go and look for the solution. And I think that's really key.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're words bandied. I'm one of those people. We band around words like insights exactly, all the time. But it's like, I don't know what the dictionary definition of that is, but it's got to be that it's insightful. Otherwise, it's just it's a data point. It's a fact. It's like, so what? So absolutely, definitely insights or data that tells you something or helps you understand something that you didn't have a grasp of before. That feels incredibly useful. And then to your point, it's got to, where the rubber hits the road is, so what did you do about it then? And that's the really, really excited bit. And those changes can be incremental. Even within our business, we have when we have our monthly board meetings, we always have a session on innovation, and it can often be just tiny little tools that people are deploying around the agency that's just changing the way we interact with each other, or the way that the quality of work that we develop for our clients. And that's cool. That's absolutely fine. I'm possibly a bigger fan of micro innovation than giant innovation. Leaps. It doesn't have to be leaps. And you don't have to, these days, you don't have to spend a huge amount in AI to help you make some really interesting incremental changes that you can make live, that then give you a different viewpoint and a different mindset towards AI, and then you're on the journey. I think once you do that little tiny first step, then you can say, oh, what if I applied it to that? And actually, perhaps I'll take the time to now sit back and think about that challenge that I've always had. And slowly you'll work through your enterprise, your footprint, and refine things. And then when you've finished all of those, the technology will have moved on and got even cleverer, and then you can go all the way back to the start and go, that thing that I did 5 years ago that's been brilliant, I might look at that again. And the cycle continues. And actually, I think we should embrace that and enjoy it. It's not, constant change is exciting, I think.
Completely agree. Well, I don't know about you. This has been fascinating. I could talk to you all day. And yeah, it's been great to catch up. I think really nice content you guys have been putting out there this week. And I think it's really important to demystify that. I'm really passionate about that, as well as saving dolphins and the planet. It's great to demystify this thing. There's lots of people that maybe keep it mysterious and blow smoke around it, but essentially there's some easy things to adapt and kind of take on for any business. And if we can help people do that, and then ultimately drive experiences and make the world a better place, whether that's getting the right recommendations on Amazon or it's avoiding future epidemics and pandemics, would be great too. So yeah, thanks for everyone for joining us. Thanks for all the questions. It's been brilliant, and no doubt there'll be more afterwards. So please do feel free to get in touch with us, obviously, or with Ian and the team at Sagittarius as well. And no doubt we'll be more than happy to have a conversation anytime about AI.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy.
Cheers, guys. Thanks, Ian.
Bye.